A barren landscape in southern Arizona, about 50 miles from the Mexican border. Even the name of the place sounds bleak: Skeleton Canyon. On September 4, 1886, U.S. soldiers led by Captain Henry Lawton bring in a small group of Apache warriors from the Chiricahua tribe, whom they have been pursuing for several months on the Mexican side of the border. They had good reason. The leader of the group, Geronimo, then nearly 60 years old, terrorized settlers on both sides of the U.S. Mexico border for 30 years, murdering, robbing, kidnapping, even torturing. In the last 6 months alone, his band of 16 is said to kill at least 500 Mexicans. Now for the fourth and last time, he is officially surrendering to the U.S. military, represented here by General Nelson Miles. The warrior side of a man considered by some to be a mass murderer and by others a tireless fighter against the oppression of Native Americans is over, but not his life. Geronimo has 23 years ahead of him, which he will spend formally as a prisoner of war, but in reality much more as a living legend or a celebrity. After all, who wouldn't want to meet the man who was said to be the worst American Indian who ever lived? He was born around 1829. His grandfather was a medicine man of one of the Chiricahua tribes, and he was brought up according to the native tradition. His original name was Goyatle, which means the one who yawns. The key moment in his life happened in March 1858. He was in his 30s, had a wife and 3 children. By the time he and the other warriors left, a group of 400 Mexican soldiers attacked their camp near the present-day town of Llanos. Among the natives slaughtered were Goyatle's mother, wife, and all the children. It is necessary to explain how things went in this area for many years. From the 16th century onwards, Mexican settlers, descendants of Spanish immigrants, settled here. They established villages in lands the Apache tribes considered their property. The natives launched bloody raids on them, but these could be considered as defense of their territory only partially. In fact, the robberies and looting served as a source of subsistence and trade for many Apache bands too. After 1848, when the southern territories from California to Texas became part of the United States, the Apache had other new enemies, the American settlers. It is on this ground that Goyatle's struggle begins to unfold. The so-called Apache Wars are in full swing, often involving the simple ambush and murder of civilians, women and children. The Chiricahuas seek revenge after the massacre of their village, and Goyatle is charged by his chief to lead it. Here, while fighting Mexican soldiers, his new name is born, Geronimo. He is so fearless, tenacious and fanatical that his terrified adversaries cry aloud for help from their patron Saint Jerome. The name Geronimo quickly catches on and will inspire terror among Mexicans and American settlers for years. It is true that Apache raids have always been very bloody. Geronimo, however, surpassed all his predecessors in cruelty and number of attacks. The Great Spirit is said to have told him that he would come out alive from every battle, that he would never die by any weapon. And he acted accordingly. His bravery bordered on madness, but he knew the local countryside perfectly, and he was very lucky, so that he escaped almost miraculously from seemingly hopeless situations. The natives believed that he had supernatural powers. He could see into the future or know what was happening dozens of miles away from him. A total of 3 times between 1875 and 1885, Geronimo surrendered to the U.S. Army and agreed to go to a reservation. Each time, however, he fled. Either the government violated the terms of the agreement or life in the reservation was simply hard to bear for people used to moving freely and hunting wherever they pleased. Maybe it was a little of both. After each escape, Geronimo lived as he was used to. He crossed over to Mexico, where American soldiers could not follow him, and here he and a small group of fellow tribesmen robbed and killed. Sometimes he made an attack on the American side and quickly returned to Mexican territory. He usually targeted isolated ranches and homesteads, stole cattle and guns, and usually killed any people he encountered to get rid of witnesses and make pursuit more difficult. But before the last escape, the situation had changed. The desperate Mexican government allowed U.S. troops to track the attacking Apaches into its territory, and Geronimo soon found himself in an intractable situation. In particular, from April 1886 onward, he had to face a never-ending pursuit, with Captain Lawton and the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry relentlessly chasing Geronimo's band through the mountains of northern Mexico. The order was, return Geronimo to the United States, dead or alive. At the turn of August and September, Geronimo could no longer resist. The Apache trackers who helped the U.S. Army were on his heels, and he capitulated. On September 4, in the aforementioned Skeleton Canyon, he surrendered to General Miles. Geronimo and his men were now prisoners of war. They were moved nearly 2,000 miles east to Florida, largely because they would have been lynched in Arizona. They were promised that they would be reunited with their families there, but these were placed in another fortress. In addition, their children were taken away from them and sent to be educated in Pennsylvania. Many Chiricahuas also died of tuberculosis and malaria in the unfamiliar climate. Geronimo's warriors did not meet their families until 2 years later, when they were all transferred to Oklahoma, which was more similar to their natural habitat. Here, under the supervision of the Fort Sill garrison, they were able to settle down and begin farming the land they had been allotted. Geronimo himself became a tourist attraction. People came from all over America to see him, buying his buttons and hats as souvenirs. Geronimo later served as an attraction at American exhibitions and fairs, including the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. At one time, he also performed in a Western show, and although he was never a chief of his tribe, he was invited to participate in President Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade alongside 5 real chiefs. That a man with his past should ride a horse down Fifth Avenue on such a solemn occasion is one of the many paradoxes of Geronimo's life. The fact that here, as in all his activities, he was under the constant surveillance of the army does not change that. In February 1909, Geronimo fell from his horse at his home in Fort Sill. He remained lying on the ground throughout the freezing night. They found him in the morning. A few days later, at the age of about 80, he died of pneumonia. He is buried in the Apache Cemetery at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So ends the extraordinary life story of a man who fought Mexicans and Americans for 30 years, longer than anyone else, and who, despite his crimes, became a celebrity. A man about whom there were fundamental differences of opinion during his lifetime. And nothing has changed even today.